It was the moment every mother dreams of: my daughter Victoria, radiant in her grandmother's delicate heirloom pearls, gliding down the aisle on her wedding day. The garden behind our antebellum home in Charleston, South Carolina, was alive with the soft hum of celebration. 300 guests, their faces glowing with joy, had gathered to witness this milestone, a day that symbolized love, family, and unity. I stood there, clutching a small bouquet of white roses, my heart swelling with pride. But then, in an instant, everything changed. Douglas, my husband of 30 years, leaned close to my ear. His breath was warm against my cheek, carrying a casual tone that belied the weight of his words. "After this, I'm moving out. I've already packed. We'll talk later." The words hit me like ice water, chilling me to my core during what should have been the most beautiful moment of our daughter's life. I froze, my smile fixed, my hands steady despite the storm raging within me. How could he do this? How could he choose this moment, of all moments, to shatter our world? My name is Evelyn Sharp, and I'm 58 years old. For 3 decades, I've been the devoted wife of Douglas Sharp, a man whose name is synonymous with success in Charleston's commercial real estate scene. I managed our home, raised our daughter, and supported his ambitions while he built his empire. Today was supposed to be the culmination of everything we'd worked for together, watching Victoria marry the love of her life in the garden that had been the backdrop of our family's happiest memories. But Douglas had other plans, and his betrayal was about to unravel everything. "Of course, dear," I whispered back, my voice calm, betraying none of the shock coursing through my veins. I straightened my posture, my eyes fixed on Victoria's glowing smile as she reached the altar. Inside, my heart was breaking, but I refused to let it show. Not today. Not in front of our daughter, our family, our friends. Douglas adjusted his tie, seemingly satisfied that he'd dropped his bombshell without causing a scene. Little did he know, he'd just ignited a fire within me, one that would change everything. As Victoria and her new husband, Thomas, exchanged vows under the sprawling magnolia trees, their words of love and commitment echoed through the garden. "I promise to cherish you, to stand by you through every challenge," Victoria said, her voice trembling with emotion. To everyone watching, Douglas and I were the picture of marital success, a couple who'd weathered 30 years together and emerged stronger, prouder, united. But those vows, so full of hope, felt like a cruel mockery now. Each word stabbed at my heart, reminder of the promises Douglas had broken. 3 rows behind us, I caught a glimpse of her, Leah Morrison, his 28-year-old secretary, sitting primly in a navy dress that, in hindsight, was far too luxurious for her salary. She'd been with Douglas's company, Bright Hollow Development, for 2 years. I'd always thought her professional, even pleasant, during the rare times we'd met at company events. How naive I'd been. How blind to the truth that was unfolding right under my nose. I kept my composure, my face serene, as the photographer captured moment after moment, Douglas and I standing side by side, smiling proudly as our daughter pledged her life to Thomas. To the world, we were the perfect parents, the perfect couple. But inside, something cold and calculating was forming in my chest. Douglas had chosen this moment, our daughter's wedding day, to announce his betrayal. He'd waited until I was trapped in public, surrounded by family and friends, knowing any emotional reaction would ruin Victoria's perfect day. He thought he cornered me, forced me into silent acceptance of his decision. He was wrong. What Douglas didn't know was that I'd seen this coming months ago. I'd been preparing, quietly and meticulously, for the moment he'd reveal his true intentions. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a declaration of war. And I was ready to fight. The signs had started 6 months earlier, subtle at first, easy to dismiss as the restlessness of a man approaching 60. Douglas began working later, claiming urgent projects that demanded evening meetings. His phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, now stayed glued to his side, its screen angled away from me. He'd upgraded his wardrobe without a word, his comfortable khakis replaced by tailored suits that made him look younger, more vibrant, almost like a stranger. Our marriage had never been the stuff of Hollywood romance, but it had been steady, reliable, built on mutual respect, or so I thought. We'd created Bright Hollow Development together, though Douglas took the spotlight, charming clients and closing deals while I worked behind the scenes, managing the financial side with precision. I'd sacrificed my own career as a certified public accountant to support his dreams, handling investments, estate planning, and tax strategies. For 30 years, I'd been the perfect wife, hosting dinner parties for investors, managing our household staff, coordinating family vacations, and ensuring Douglas never had to worry about the mundane details of life. I raised Victoria while he traveled, celebrated his successes while downplaying my own contributions, and maintained our social calendar with the precision of a military strategist. But after Victoria's engagement announcement last year, something shifted. Douglas became distant, distracted. He'd stare at his phone during dinner, claiming to read industry news, but I caught the reflection of text messages in his wine glass. He stopped mentioning Leah by name, referring to her only as my assistant, with a careful neutrality that set off alarms in my mind. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to believe it. Not yet 3 months ago, I could no longer ignore my suspicions. I began my own investigation, starting small, checking our joint credit card statements with a scrutiny I hadn't applied in years. There were charges at restaurants I'd never visited, boutiques selling women's clothing in sizes far smaller than mine. Then I discovered a second cell phone bill, paid from an account I'd never seen before. When Douglas claimed he was attending a real estate conference in Atlanta, I called the venue and learned the event had been canceled months earlier. That's when I hired Catherine Webb, a private investigator recommended by my longtime attorney, Harrison Phillips. Catherine was thorough, discreet, and relentless. Over the course of weeks, she provided me with photographs, financial records, and a timeline that painted a devastating picture. Leah Morrison wasn't just Douglas's secretary. She was his mistress, his confidant, and, apparently, his planned future. The most damning evidence was an apartment lease Catherine uncovered, a year-long contract for a luxury condo downtown, listing Douglas and Leah as occupants. The security deposit had come from a business account he'd opened without my knowledge, funded by money he'd siphoned from our joint investments. As I watched Victoria dance with Thomas at the reception, twirling in circles of ivory silk while guests clapped and cheered, a strange sense of clarity settled over me. Douglas had underestimated me completely. He saw me as the passive wife who'd always accommodated his needs, who'd never question his decisions or challenge his authority. He had no idea what I was capable of when properly motivated. The final blow came 2 weeks before Victoria's wedding, as I was reviewing our financial statements. I noticed irregular transfers, significant sums moved from our joint accounts to an investment fund I didn't recognize. When I called our financial advisor, Patricia Coleman, her voice carried a note of concern. "I assumed you knew about the new portfolio Douglas established," she said. "He specifically requested that all documentation be sent to his office address." That evening, I confronted Douglas in his study, where he was reviewing contracts, his desk littered with papers. I placed printouts of the unauthorized transfers in front of him, watching as his confident facade cracked for just a moment. "Evelyn, these are just business investments," he said, his voice lacking its usual certainty. "I'm diversifying our holdings to protect our retirement." "Our retirement?" I replied, my tone level, professional, betraying none of the anger simmering beneath. "These transfers are going to accounts with only your name attached, and according to Patricia, you've instructed that I be excluded from all communications regarding these investments." Douglas stood, moving to the window overlooking our garden, his shoulders tensing as the truth settled between us. "I know about Leah, Douglas," I said, my voice steady. "I know about the apartment, the secret phone, all of it." He turned slowly, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw him as a stranger. The man I'd loved and supported for 3 decades looked at me with calculation, not affection, measuring how much damage control he'd need to manage. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "I want honesty," I replied, the words sharper than I'd intended. I want to know how long you've been planning to leave, and I want to know why you're stealing from our joint accounts to fund your new life." His audacity was breathtaking. "I'm not stealing anything," he said, his voice regaining its businessman's edge. "Those funds represent my contribution to our marriage, and I have every right to protect my interests." "My interests?" I countered, my voice calm but laced with steel. "I've been managing our finances for 30 years, Douglas. I know exactly what each of us contributed, and it's not what you think." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. He'd always assumed I was simply paying bills and balancing checkbooks, never realizing the sophisticated web of investments, trusts, and legal protections I'd woven around our assets. He'd never bothered to understand the complexity of our financial structure because he'd never thought he'd need to. The weeks leading up to Victoria's wedding became a delicate dance of deception. Douglas played the devoted father, enthusiastically discussing reception details and guest arrangements, while secretly finalizing his escape plan. I, meanwhile, played the role of the overwhelmed mother of the bride, using wedding preparations as a cover for meetings with Harrison Phillips, my attorney, and countless hours spent documenting our financial holdings. Harrison's office overlooked Charleston Harbor, and I found myself staring at the sailboats bobbing on the water as he reviewed the evidence Catherine had gathered. "Evelyn, what Douglas has done constitutes marital misconduct under South Carolina law," he said, spreading photographs and financial documents across his mahogany desk. "The secret transfers, the hidden apartment lease, the systematic depletion of joint assets, all of this supports your position in divorce proceedings." But I didn't want a lengthy court battle that would drag our family's name through the mud. Douglas thrived on his reputation as a successful family man and community leader. His real estate empire depended on trust and relationships built over decades of careful image management. "I don't want to destroy him publicly," I told Harrison. "I want him to destroy himself." That's when we devised what Harrison called the surgical approach. Instead of fighting Douglas's asset transfers, we'd let him continue making them, ensuring he was actually transferring money he no longer legally owned. Over the next 10 days, I signed papers that moved the majority of our assets into irrevocable trusts, protected investment accounts, and legal entities that Douglas couldn't access without my consent. Our family home, the vacation house on Kiowa Island, the investment properties generating our rental income, everything was quietly shifted into structures that safeguarded my interests while leaving Douglas's transfers as evidence of attempted fraud. Catherine's final discovery was the most satisfying. Douglas had been methodically moving money for months, believing he was securing his future with Leah. What he didn't realize was that most of the accounts he'd been funding were connected to assets I'd already protected through legal restructuring. "Your husband has essentially been stealing his own money and giving it to his mistress," Catherine explained with professional satisfaction. "When the divorce proceedings begin, those transfers will be viewed as dissipation of marital assets, which means he'll be required to reimburse the marital estate." On the morning of Victoria's wedding, I woke before dawn, reviewing my preparations one final time. In a safety deposit box downtown, I'd placed copies of all financial documents, evidence of Douglas's affair, and a detailed timeline of his asset transfers. I'd also deposited the divorce papers Harrison had prepared, along with a comprehensive asset list that would shock Douglas when he realized the scope of his miscalculation. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly, despite Douglas's devastating whisper. Victoria looked radiant, her vows heartfelt and sincere, promising to love Thomas through every challenge life might bring. I maintained my composure, smiling at the right moments, dabbing my eyes with a handkerchief when Victoria's voice broke with emotion. The photography session was a surreal exercise in pretense. Douglas and I posed for family portraits, his arm around my waist as if nothing had changed. When the photographer requested a picture of just the parents, he pulled me closer, playing the devoted husband perfectly. "Beautiful ceremony," Leah commented during the cocktail hour, her voice carefully neutral as she approached us. "Victoria looks absolutely stunning." I smiled pleasantly, noting how Douglas's jaw tightened slightly. "Thank you," I replied. "We're so proud of her." The three of us stood there, an awkward triangle of civility masking the explosive truth beneath. Leah excused herself quickly, probably sensing a tension she couldn't quite identify. During dinner, Douglas delivered a performance worthy of an award. His father's speech was strong, emotional, recounting Victoria's childhood and the pride he felt in the woman she'd become. He thanked me publicly for being the heart of our family, the woman who made all of this possible. The applause was thunderous, and guests approached me afterward, commenting on our wonderful marriage, how lucky Victoria was to have parents who adored each other after so many years. Each compliment felt like a small blade, but I smiled graciously, accepting their praise while planning Douglas's downfall. As the evening progressed, I noticed Douglas checking his watch repeatedly, probably eager to leave with Leah once the reception wound down. His eyes found her across the room, anticipation building in his expression. The moment I'd been waiting for came during the last dance, as Victoria and Thomas swayed to their wedding song, surrounded by loved ones. Douglas leaned close again. "I know this is difficult," he said quietly, "but I think it's better this way. A clean break, no prolonged arguments or negotiations." "I agree completely," I replied, my voice steady. "A clean break is exactly what we need." He looked surprised by my calm response, probably expecting tears or pleas for reconsideration. "I'm glad you understand," he said. "I was worried you might make this complicated." "Oh, Douglas," I said softly, meeting his eyes directly, "I would never make things complicated for you." Something in my tone must have registered, because his confident expression flickered. But before he could respond, Victoria and Thomas approached, glowing with happiness, ready for their honeymoon departure. As we waved goodbye to the newlyweds, Douglas stood beside me, rice in his hair, his arm around my shoulders for the final photographs. I felt a sense of completion. Victoria was safely married, and Douglas was about to discover his escape plan was a trap of his own making. After the last guest departed and the catering staff finished cleaning up, Douglas and I found ourselves alone in the garden. He'd loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, looking relaxed and pleased with how smoothly the day had gone. "That went well," he said, surveying the remnants of the reception. Victoria looked happy. "She did," I agreed, then turned to face him directly. "I believe you mentioned we needed to talk." His expression shifted, becoming serious as he prepared for what he expected to be a manageable conversation. "Evelyn, I know this comes as a shock, but if we handle this maturely, we can minimize the disruption for everyone involved." "I appreciate your concern for minimizing disruption," I said, reaching into my evening purse to retrieve a manila envelope I'd carried all day. "I've prepared something that should help with that." Douglas looked puzzled as I handed him the envelope. "What's this?" "Everything you'll need for your fresh start," I replied calmly, "including some documents I think you should review immediately." His confusion deepened as he opened the envelope and began examining the contents. I watched his face carefully, noting the moment his confidence began to crack. It started with a small frown as he read the first page, then progressed to genuine alarm as he flipped through the divorce papers. "This is dated 3 weeks ago," he said slowly, his voice carrying uncertainty. "Yes," I replied pleasantly. "I filed them the day after I discovered your secret apartment lease." "Keep reading. The asset list is particularly interesting." Douglas's hands trembled as he reached the financial documentation, copies of every transfer he'd made, every hidden account he'd opened, every penny he'd moved to fund his new life with Leah. More importantly, I'd included the legal documents showing how those assets had been restructured months before his transfers began. "You can't do this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "These accounts, these investments, I established them. The money came from our joint holdings." "Actually, Douglas," I said, my tone conversational, as if discussing the weather, "if you look more closely at the dates, you'll see I restructured our holdings well before you began your unauthorized transfers. What you've been moving for the past 6 months is money you no longer had legal access to." The color drained from his face as the implication sank in. "The house, the business accounts, the investment properties, all protected through irrevocable trusts and legal entities that require my consent for any transactions." He flipped frantically through the papers, searching for a loophole. Your transfers to Leah's accounts constitute fraud under South Carolina law, I continued. Harrison has already filed the appropriate paperwork with the district attorney's office. Douglas looked up, his expression a mix of fear and dawning comprehension. He'd been outmaneuvered. How long have you known? He asked desperately. Long enough to protect myself properly, I replied. Long enough to ensure your betrayal couldn't destroy what I've spent 30 years building. We stood in silence among the scattered rose petals and empty champagne glasses, the ruins of Victoria's perfect wedding serving as a backdrop to the end of our marriage. Douglas's panic was immediate and complete. Evelyn, please, he said, his voice cracking. We can work this out. I'll call off the apartment, end things with Leah. We don't have to destroy everything we've built. I looked at him with genuine pity. Even now, he didn't understand the magnitude of his miscalculation. Douglas, you chose to end our marriage the moment you whispered your announcement during our daughter's wedding ceremony, I said quietly. You chose to steal from our joint accounts to fund your affair. You chose to hide assets and plan your future without any consideration for the woman who spent 30 years supporting your dreams. He flipped through the documents again, hoping he'd misunderstood something crucial. The business, our reputation, if this becomes public, it'll destroy everything. It doesn't have to become public, I replied. If you sign the divorce agreement and cooperate with the asset recovery process, we can handle this discreetly. But if you choose to fight these proceedings, every detail of your affair and financial misconduct will become part of the public record. The aftermath unfolded as Harrison had predicted. By Monday morning, Douglas discovered his access to every significant account had been terminated. The business credit cards he'd used for secret transactions were canceled, the investment portfolios he'd counted on were protected, and the apartment he'd leased for Leah was under investigation for fraudulent funding. Leah Morrison submitted her resignation from Bright Hollow Development that week, likely realizing her association with Douglas had become a liability. Catherine's documentation of their relationship ensured Leah's future in Charleston's business community would be challenging. Douglas tried to salvage his situation, contacting mutual friends and business associates for sympathy, but word of his affair and financial misconduct spread quickly through Charleston's social circles. The man who'd built his reputation on trustworthiness found himself increasingly isolated. The fraud investigation proceeded methodically, with Douglas's unauthorized transfers strengthening the case against him. Within 2 weeks, he faced potential criminal charges alongside the civil proceedings. I maintained my dignity throughout, attending Victoria's post-wedding brunch as planned, graciously accepting congratulations from friends unaware of Douglas's departure. When asked about his absence, I simply said he was handling urgent business matters. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 30 years of supporting Douglas's career and reputation, I was now protecting the family name while he destroyed everything he'd claimed to value. By the time Victoria returned from her honeymoon in Italy, Douglas had quietly settled the divorce agreement, avoiding a public trial that would have exposed every detail of his betrayal. As I sit in my garden 6 months later, watching the magnolias bloom where Victoria danced on her wedding day, I realized Douglas's betrayal was a gift. It freed me to discover my own strength and independence after decades of living in his shadow. Sometimes, the most devastating betrayals become the foundation for our greatest victories. I've reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my future. And as the sun sets over Charleston, I know I'm just beginning to write the next chapter, one where I'm the author of my own story. Please feel free to comment below if you liked this. Remember to like and subscribers for more.